Torpedo builds. They have been the ultimate DPS meta in Star Trek Online for a while now. You probably know this because we talk about it a lot. And because of this, you guys have probably seen a lot of the high-end torpedo traits, most of which are very difficult to obtain. That's because a lot of them are on Lobi, Lockbox, and promo ships. You know, single character unlocks. Some of these traits have made their way into Mud's market, but even then, that's still rather expensive. Fortunately, there are a number of easier to obtain traits that will still benefit a torpedo build in some way or another. Though if I'm honest, not as many as I would have liked. So yeah, here we go. 10 Starship traits that are useful for a torpedo build, none of which come on a Lobi, Lockbox, or promo ship. Now, I should probably start by saying some of these traits I'm going to talk about today, I also talked about in my energy weapon traits video. Some traits are just good for more than one thing, and that actually makes them really good budget traits. This is also because it actually wasn't as easy as I thought it would be to find budget torpedo traits. 5 of these traits will be from normal C-Store ships, 4 of them from legendary ships, and 1 is from the Infinity lockboxes but isn't attached to a starship. I'll start with that one because if you've been here before, you probably already know what trait I'm talking about. Yes, once again, it's onboard dilithium recrystallizer. I know you guys are probably sick about hearing about this trait from me at this point, but it really is a good budget trait. If you max out your non-weapon subsystem powers and activate an engineering ability, you get 10% bonus damage for each power system you have maxed out. Pair this with the enhanced plasma manifold console from the Tier 1 Oberth, and you're looking at potentially 30% bonus damage to your weapons. This tactic is actually slightly better for torpedo builds than energy weapon builds, because with torpedo builds you don't have to worry about your weapon's power, because torpedo damage isn't determined by your weapon's subsystem power, so you can throw all your power from that into your other subsystems. These next 3 are also traits I talked about in my energy weapon traits video, and are all from C-Store ships. The first is Entwined Tactical Matrices off of the Gagarin and Kuj Miracle Worker battlecruisers. Anytime you activate Beam, Fire at Will, or Cannon Scatter Volley, you get a free hit of Torpedo Spread 1. It also works in the opposite direction, but for torpedo builds, you want it for that extra torp spread. Because the torpedo spread that Entwined Tactical Matrices will give you won't share a cooldown with High Yield. So by using Fire at Will, Scatter Volley, and High Yield, you basically have 3 firing modes on your torpedo build, none of which share a cooldown. Of all of the traits on this list, this is the one I would recommend the most for a torpedo build. The next trait is Promise of Ferocity from the Thousand Andorian Pilot Escort and its Lethian and Day 1 counterparts. Anytime you activate a Tactical or Pilot Bridge Officer ability, you gain a stacking bonus damage buff. This buff stacks up to 5 times but is lost once you leave combat. Like with onboard dilithium recrystallizer, the bonus damage buff is applied to all of your weapons. That's energy weapons and your torpedoes, which is why it's good for both build types. Strike from Shadows is another one of those traits that's good for pretty much anything. This trait comes from the Shran Pilot Escort and the Yamchala Bird of Prey. When you're dealing damage to an enemy that isn't targeting you, you decrease your threat generation, get a 5% buff to critical chance, and a 5% bonus damage buff to all damage. All damage means it'll be buffing your energy weapons, your torpedo damage, any bridge officer abilities or consoles that you have that do damage. I mean, the phrase all damage kind of speaks for itself. And now for a trait I haven't talked about yet, Checkmate off the Yorktown Science Starcruiser, and its Klingon and Romulan counterparts, and their legendary versions. Anytime you activate a control ability, you gain a 30% buff to exotic damage and projectile weapon damage, for 15 seconds. Specifically, this trait triggers off of jam sensors, tractor beam repulsors, scramble sensors, gravity well, and photonic shockwave. Now, you're never going to have all of these on the same build, but you already want to have at least a few of these just for the sake of triggering unconventional systems. So with this trait, you'll get a damage buff out of that too. It's not a very high damage buff because it's only Cat 1, but you'll still be able to trigger it pretty often. Next is Piercing Projectiles off of the Appalachia Blockade Runner. Anytime you activate a Torpedo or Mine Firing Mode Bridge Officer ability, you gain plus 200 to shield and hull penetration for 15 seconds. Shield penetration is a very important stat for torpedo builds, because shields block a lot of damage from torpedoes, so you're going to want to be able to mitigate that as much as possible. It's also worth noting that the Appalachia comes with a very powerful console for torpedo builds, Tricobalt Tear Launcher. If you're running a torpedo build, you're definitely going to want to pick up the Appalachia just for the sake of that console, so you'll also have the added benefit of this trait. Plus, the Appalachia is a really great ship for a torpedo build, you really can't go wrong with that one. These next 4 traits are off of legendary starships. The first being Rapid Emitting Armaments off of the legendary Dideridex. Anytime you activate a tractor beam, you gain 15% bonus damage to all of your torpedoes for 10 seconds. Additionally, this trait will also fire off 3 heavy plasma torpedoes that will have 100% shield penetration. This trait is crazy powerful for torpedo builds, which is why I'm really glad it's on a ship that's a full account unlock. Not only does it give an impressive buff to your own torpedo damage, but it also fires off additional plasma torpedoes, which will do even more damage. Just be careful with this trait. Those heavy plasma torpedoes have a big AoE on their explosion, and that AoE can kill allies, including yourself. So be careful when activating Tractor Beam when you're within 3 kilometers of your target, because it is very easy to accidentally destroy your own ship with this. The next trait is Target That Explosion off of the legendary Excelsior. Oops, I screwed up. This is also available on the Earhart and Setch Strikewing escorts, both of which are C-Store ships, so this really should have been in the previous section. Oh well. Anyway, what this trait does is anytime you activate a torpedo firing mode or a command ability, up to 6 allies will fire a photon torpedo the next time you fire your own torpedo. This one's really better for a theme build than an actual DPS focused torpedo build. This could be useful on a build that's using hangar pets, because your hangar pets do count as allies, so you can add a little more damage to them, but for actual TFO runs this probably isn't going to help you that much. My biggest concern with this trait is I don't know if that extra torpedo would consume concentrate firepower, because if it does, you probably actually don't want to use this for TFO runs, because this extra photon torpedo isn't going to do nearly as much damage as an actual player torpedo. Next is Transcranial Sensor Link off the legendary Sovereign. Anytime you defeat a foe larger than a frigate, you pick up a buff of shield penetration. Each buff will give plus 10 to shield pen and will stack up to 20 times. Like I said earlier, shield penetration is a very important skill for torpedo builds, so this could be a pretty valuable trait. The last Starship trait I'm going to talk about is Assault Formation Theta off of the legendary Talus. Anytime you decloak or use Attack Pattern Omega, you gain a buff to Weapon Amplification, that's your crit severity skill, a free Torpedo High Yield 3, and plus 20% to your turn rate. I would recommend this trait more for a ship that has a Battle Cloak, but it's not bad if you only have Attack Pattern Omega. There's actually another Starship trait that pairs pretty well with this. She's a Predator off the legendary Scimitar. That trait gives a bonus damage buff every time you activate an attack pattern ability, and it also lowers the cooldown of your cloaking device. So with this, you can further buff that extra torpedo damage you're getting from Assault Formation Theta. There we are, 10 Starship traits that are useful for a torpedo build. Like I said, this list is a little more scarce than I would have liked. It was actually kind of a struggle to find Starship traits that would actually benefit a torpedo build while also being easy to obtain, especially when you look at how many Starship traits there are for energy weapons that can be found in the C-Store. Anyway, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. It's YouTube, you know the drill, but it really does help the channel and I do appreciate it. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.